Hello everybody. A reviewer requested I do a review of this discussion between Subboor Ahmad and a geneticist in this episode of The Arena. The screen name of the geneticist is Patatas, but he later gives his name as John, so I will use that. This will cover a lot of similar ground to my 4-part series on Subboor Ahmad being clueless on homology. Please watch that for more analysis.
So this is our geneticist friend.
I have a genetics degree. Oh. Yeah, I haven't debated and shit like that. You know, I have some understanding of genetics, but
I'll give you a minute to explain what you've been trying to demonstrate to your Muslim friend using whatever method you've been trying to use. Genetics, because your background in genetics, isn't it?
So I'll just ask you a line of questions. We'll have a jolly conversation. It's not going to be a shouting match. Don't worry.
Sounds good.
It's fine. So Patatas, would you say that common ancestry, universal common ancestry, is true from your perspective?
Yeah, looks like it. Shared DNA with every living organism.
Sure. Okay. And would you say that this is something which is categorically undeniable?
Categorically undeniable. I'd say the evidence points to we share DNA with, you trace it back down the tree of life. It gets less and less as we get towards like archaea bacteria, but still core genes, like DNA replication genes. There's some homology. Yeah.
Sure. For the benefit of the viewers, could you please, and I don't want to interrupt you because you have a genetics degree, and I'm sure you can explain
okay.
I'm sure you can explain things in a very lucid way. So could you give the audience an overview of the argument for universal common ancestry?
Yeah, I guess it goes, life started simply. There was, I'll skip over the origins of life stuff because it's a bit contentious. But once there was life, once there was DNA, RNA, also known as nucleic acids, there was sort of substrate for mutations to acquire. The DNA or RNA potentially to begin with encodes proteins, which then make up cells. They have functions, enzymes. For a long time, it was just simple single-celled life on Earth. Eventually, there was some sort of event where maybe an archaea and a bacteria sort of formed a symbiosis. So the theory goes, then more complex life originated. So I feel that's a good sort of starting point for the universal part of life. If that event happened, we should share DNA with the simplest forms of life.
Okay.
So John has given a good description of how the conditions in the early Earth could have led to the development of prebiotic chemistry and the formation of nucleic acids, which formed RNA, which started the replication cycle, leading to the first DNA, the first protein, and then the diversification of life. We have evidence that this is possible as basic organic compounds were created in the Miller-Urey experiment, which simulated the early Earth.
Is there any other arguments made for the last universal common ancestor, Luca, and phylogenetics in general being a tree shape? Is there any other evidence for that besides what you've pointed out?
It gets complicated, especially with microbes, because they sort of share DNA, or you'd say horizontally. So it's not just inherited down from parents to offspring.
He has correctly identified that with single-celled life, there was much transfer of genetic information between cells, and that this can give the appearance of the base of the tree of life a more web or bush-like pattern. Once, however, we get into eukaryotic and multicellular life, then the base is more like a single lineage.
There's DNA shared that way. And also, I guess, in eukaryotes or multicellular life, there's probably transmission of DNA from some viruses, packaging the wrong thing.
Yeah. So horizontal gene transfer is non-Darwinian, but I'm willing to grant that we can still, in terms of the overall framing, allow that to fit within the modern synthesis purview, right? We can say it's an add-on. It's the extended synthesis.
As in Darwin didn't know it was a thing in nature. Is that what you mean by non-Darwinian, or you mean it's not able to be selected for?
What I mean is that the modern synthesis, and remember the modern synthesis is neo-Darwinism. So it's to make it easier for the audience to understand is, as you know, Darwin didn't know about genetics. So he believed in natural selection, working on random variation. So Mendel's the one who, really kicked off the field of genetics. So random mutations plus natural selection, that field was known as the modern synthesis. And the modern synthesis essentially codified Darwin's ideas in a bit more of a rigorous way. So you had the central dogma, you had the Weismann barrier, you had hereditary going down vertically. So now with horizontal gene transfer, that's a challenge to the modern synthesis, but
it's not a challenge at all. Horizontal gene transfer, as we stated, occurs primarily in single-celled organisms. It does not affect the natural selection acting on random variation, or sexual selection, or genetic drift, or the other types of evolution that we have discovered since Darwin.
Let's just say it extends off it. It's non-Darwinian in the sense that it's post-modern synthesis, but it's an add-on. Still, overall, your argument is still based upon the idea that all of life has one origin. Correct me if I'm going to be misconstruing the argument. All of life has one origin because we all share similar genetics. We share the similar genetic material, similar DNA.
Those of you who watched my 4-part series on Subboor being clueless on homology are probably facepalming right now. We can never be certain, but the originating from one common ancestor is the most parsimonious and statistically likely explanation for the shared similarities between living organisms.
I would argue that universal common ancestry is not something that's been proven to be true, is not categorically, is not a fact in the sense that it's absolute.
While the caller may have a degree in genetics, he doesn't have a degree in dealing with Subboor's BS. This is the same old trope that he repeats in many of his videos, where he would dismiss a scientific fact because it is not absolute. Science is never about absolute. Nobody who understands science says it is. A fact in science is objectively verified data. He has been schooled in this by Aaron Ra, but he still uses this line of argumentation as he doesn't have anything better. He knows most of his listeners take the claims of Muhammad as an absolute fact, yet that is built on even shakier assumptions.
And it's something which is based upon assumptions. They are fundamental assumptions. And my further contention is most scientists, now I'm going to be careful, most scientists, not all, are unaware of the philosophical assumptions behind universal common ancestry. Hence, they would say things like universal common ancestry has been proven to be true, it's indisputable, because they are not aware of what these assumptions are.
They would say it's by far the most likeliest explanation, as anybody who studies science will understand that in science, nothing is final or absolute. We can, however, be quite certain about some aspects of science, like evolution, that to doubt it would border on reality denial.
So let me just lay out these assumptions. The first assumption is that there is one origin of life. So this is known as the origination probability.
This nonsense about origination and transformation probabilities, where he randomly and totally subjectively chooses whatever probability number he wants that suits his purpose, was completely debunked in my 4-part series here. Please watch that for a full explanation.
And behind these assumptions, there's a wider perspective, which is that they all have to fit within methodological naturalism, which is that every single cause that's invoked in science, in biology in this context, has to be broken down to natural processes.
Yes, because science only deals with the natural. If you want to postulate supernatural or magic or whatever else that is outside of the natural, you need to demonstrate a way of reliably testing for it that can provide evidence, rather than it just being in your holy book.
And natural here means physical. So if anybody is to argue universal common ancestry is true, I would say, no, it's not true. It is something that you believe to be true based upon these two fundamental probabilities and based upon the wider assumption of methodological adaptation, methodological naturalism.
So putting the obfuscation aside, he's basically saying that universal common ancestry is true in a scientific sense given our interpretation of the evidence, and that we can only look to natural and testable causes. Scientists are happy with this explanation as the best explanation that we have. However, Subboor isn't happy with this because his religion forces him to believe in miraculous creation, which is not part of science.
And if these assumptions were to be changed, if these probabilities are to be tweaked, then you would get something totally different.
Not probabilities, but new evidence. If and when that new evidence arises, then we will rethink our theories. But until then, we will look to the best explanation possible.
Do you think any of these assumptions are required, though? When you track back, say you take a gene that we have, you can test the sequence homology to any gene within the genomes of another organism you want to test, including bacteria. There's no assumptions for where the tree began. The data tells you we have this much DNA in common in this gene with this organism.
Yeah.
The question is why? Why is that? And we go, oh, well, our closer ancestors have more genes in common with us, more homology. They behave similarly to us, you know, that you go on.
There is an assumption behind all of that. You see, what you're doing is you're looking at similarities, whether they're biochemical, they're anatomical, whatever they are, and you are going back and saying, clearly, there must be one origin, and they come back from that.
No, I'm saying, yeah, there's not an assumption that there's one origin. It's is it not a simple explanation?
No.
That's why we share DNA.
So the caller has correctly stated that universal common ancestry is the most likely scenario given the similarities in DNA, which would be statistically much more improbable if they came through separate ancestors. It's good that he saw through Subboor's nonsense about probabilities.
The studies being done in abiogenesis to try and show how inorganic led to organic, the very idea there that they're trying to push is, how did this unique event happen? They don't make the argument that this is something happening in nature all the time, like photosynthesis or something. They're saying it's a rare event, hence why Richard Dawkins is using the word, you need the first stroke of luck.
I don't know how people would determine that.
Sorry?
I don't know how people would determine the rarity of it. You know,
exactly.
we can't set up the initial conditions.
Exactly. That's the point. It's an assumption.
One origin of a self-replicating molecule is the most likely explanation, given the similarity of the genetic code amongst all living organisms. There could have been multiple nucleic acids in various locations on Earth, which could have formed prebiotically or arrived on asteroids. Once life took over and the Earth's condition changed, it would have likely been near impossible for new life to form, given the change in circumstances.
So if you've got 5 early organisms and they each take a different branch, does it only matter at the point that they've branched? Like when you go down millions of years of generations and new species? And
good.
Where does
good,
that end
good,
up?
good. Excellent question. Okay. So you probably are aware of that controversial cover of the New Scientist magazine in 2009, which said Darwin was wrong, and it had the picture of the tree of life, right? Now, the reason why certain people like Richard Dawkins were very upset at that article, at the front cover, was because what they were arguing is, yes, there are multiple supposed. You have a lot of crossover at the root of the tree. There seems to be a lot of you wouldn't say independent events, but you'd say there's a lot of the simplicity, the simple idea of life going back to one clean origin is not there.
This is the front cover of the New Scientist magazine to which Subboor was referring. There was criticism of the headline, which was considered to be sensationalist and inaccurate. This review here, which I will link in the description, explains how the base of the tree is more like a web or bush, as we described earlier, due to horizontal gene transfer between single-celled organisms, but once you move into multicellular life, then it branches out into a traditional tree-like pattern. So Darwin wasn't wrong about evolution, he just wasn't aware of horizontal gene transfer between single-celled organisms. Creationists, of course, have tried to twist these developments to imply that the tree of life and universal common ancestry is wrong.
If we have 5 independent origins, but then they converge, and then when it comes to animals and plants, it's coming from the same branch, then you're saying it doesn't matter. That's essentially what you're saying, right?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Have I got you right? Because I want to get you right.
Yeah, you got me.
Yeah. But I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is you have 5 independent origins, hypothetically, which don't converge, but they are complete independent lineages.
And they share genes horizontally to make the bush?
No, because remember, it's to do with origination probabilities. If there's 5 origination probabilities, 5 self-replicating molecules, the environment and selection pressures and random mutations in these 5 lineages are all happening independently, then you're going to have organisms like organism 1 and organism 5. They both have, say, a particular type of mammalian creature. They will have similar genetics, but that will not be due to common ancestry.
It is possible that there could be 5 separate origins of life that do not share genetic data between them, but have genetic similarities. This, however, would be highly improbable and would go against the principle of parsimony, where the best hypothesis is the one that requires the fewest evolutionary changes. It is much more statistically likely to be common ancestry with one origin which branches out through evolution as an explanation for the similar traits. I will link a very good video explaining parsimony in the description.
So, assuming their environments are the same, shaping the same traits.
They're all evolving on this planet, aren't they?
Yeah, but so are pelicans and giraffes, you know? There's different niches to the planet.
Yeah, they are.
This part demonstrates, again, just how clueless Subboor is in his argumentation and desperation to avoid universal common ancestry. Subboor made a point, the caller made a counterpoint, and Subboor just said yes and moved on, even though the caller's point contradicted what he said. The caller's example is of pelicans and giraffes. They share characteristics that are similar as they're both animals, but their last common ancestor existed about 319 million years ago. They occupy different niches, so this exacerbated their differences. For Subboor's example of 5 completely independent origins, we have already concluded that this is statistically highly improbable. If they share the same niche, there would still be significant differences between them. But since there are many niches on the Earth, they would divulge very quickly genetically and morphologically. There is much further repetition of the same points. Subboor then cops out of the discussion by directing the caller to his video series with the creationist Paul Nelson.
Potatus, it's been lovely speaking to you. So I really want you to check out this series I have. Okay, so in my screen, you're going to see this playlist, which has 7 episodes, so it's maybe around 10 hours of content. And here, everything about origination probabilities and transition probabilities and why they're actually there, and the philosophers that explain them and why these assumptions are being made. Everything is done. So this is testing universal common ancestry.
Perhaps we should ask why Paul Nelson spent all this time talking to another clueless creationist when he could have tried to persuade the wider scientific community. In summary, in science we accept that we can never be absolute, but we accept the most likely explanation as the best explanation until new evidence comes along that could change our theories. The best explanation that fits all the available facts is universal common ancestry. Subboor argues against universal common ancestry because his religion forces him to believe in the special creation of Adam. The best method for exposing Subboor's nonsense is not to just sit there and listen to his lecture, but to ask him what is the best explanation for the facts that we see, and what evidence does he see to make that explanation. If he invokes the supernatural, then ask him how he can confidently test for the supernatural.